Okay, actually, we're going to have time for some a group Q&A. So I think John stepped out to take a quick phone call. Hopefully that's in there. It is. So I think what we can do is we can have the panelists come to the front, or they can just answer from their seats. But we'll open up the floor to questions regarding any of the presentations. With respect to any of the 3 sessions you heard earlier, or continuing to follow up on any of the tangents that we only touched on just a bit earlier. But this is your chance to ask any of the 3 panelists any questions you may have. We have plenty of time to get into some questions. No questions? Oh, we got it. Yep, thank you.
A couple quick ones.
Sure.
The thing that makes people inadmissible, they become inadmissible automatically upon violating those things, or does there have to be an adjudication?
It depends on, remember the 3 different NPAs that Don was talking about. It's based on how they entered. And they committed something, then you need to look at the statute to see.
Yeah. Well, I'm talking about people who are already here who commit an aggravated felony. Are they, from that point on, like they get deported and they come back, are they inadmissible, or does that need to be adjudicated?
Well, if they were deported once and they're coming back and they got caught again, then there's a different, completely reinstatement of their deportation proceedings, which is a whole different gambit.
Is there a separate penalty for that?
Reinstatement, yes. It depends on when the first deportation was. If it was before the reform, before 2000, pre-IRA, I want to say, yeah. If it's pre-IRA, then there are other forms of relief you need to look at to see if you can even get the reinstatement order vacated.
I'm basically saying, what do I advise someone who I tell them you're going to get deported and says, don't worry, I'll be back next month?
Oh, yeah, that is.
There's a separate criminal ground for entering after a deportation. So
That's a federal offense?
yes, yes.
Yes, the U.S. Marshals can take you, and it's 5 years.
I don't
U.S.
know.
Marshals.
I don't know the citation, but illegal reentry.
And do you know of any good way to figure out an immigrant's A number if they don't know if they're a database somewhere?
No, usually if my guy has been picked up and he's in Fairfax, if you call the courthouse and they say yes, there is an immigration detainer, sometimes they'll be nice enough to, if you've already built that relationship, they'll tell you what their A number is.
Okay, courthouse, you know, and if someone has an ICE container, then they definitely already have been assigned an A number?
Yes.
Sometimes ICE doesn't put a container out for months while that's and then the last minute it comes out. Is it always issued? They just never programmed it, or how does that work?
I don't know what their processing is as to when they need to issue it, but they can issue it at any time. There may be times when your guy is done with his sentence, and they may come and pick him up from his house. So there's no time frame as to if they want to do it the first day he gets sentenced, or the last day, or even 5 years after he's completed his sentence.
Yeah, I would just say on the back that container programs, like you said, it depends on whether the locality is secure communities, and if you're caught in Arizona under that sheriff, I think got locked up or whatever, then yeah, you definitely going to report you, you're going to create his own container. But if you're caught in Maryland, this is a hard subject to teach in Virginia, because I think Virginia's ways up where the Maryland is on that. I always tell my clients, you guys can ride through to Maryland, not Virginia. Y'all, criminal attorneys, it's too late for y'all, but I always tell my clients, going forward,
well, even getting a Virginia driver's license, sometimes I can get my client a work permit, but then they take that to DMV, and Virginia DMV will not issue them a driver's license. And that is, I think, a complete disconnect that the AG's office needs to do something about. To get the person, how is the person going to get to work if they don't have a car? They're going to be driving without a license again, and they're going to get caught again. But Maryland is better at that. Maryland will issue them driver's license. DC, yeah, exactly. DC and Maryland will. Virginia will not.
But if you do have some kind of lawful status in for getting a
But-
license in Virginia for persons, Vivian Cheetah, she's in Richmond. They have a whole unit dedicated to
Which is
Virginia.
the headquarters of DMV.
Very friendly.
On Broad Street.
Yeah, very, very friendly. Reach out to them. If your clients having a problem, reach out to us. It's not a lot, but I generally agree.
Yeah, is it John or the habeas corpus? Let me ask you something. I know, we had talked briefly on the ICE, as far as custody for habeas corpus purposes and ICE being, considered custody. Have you come across something that's going on where they're in ICE custody, you've done the habeas corpus, but then they move them out of Virginia? Because a lot, even that the Ibrahim case was, I think he was in ICE custody, but he was also in Rappahannock, with the Virginia prison. What have you come across the issue when immigration moves them outside of a Virginia prison?
Yeah, usually it's irrelevant for habeas. There's an issue of who are you going to name as your respondent. And it's really a technical issue because the respondent is always the state, and the Attorney General in most instances is going to respond, not all instances. But if he's in Rappahannock, then you're going to usually name the sheriff of the Rappahannock jail. And if he moved, technically, if he's moved, you're supposed to, at some point, replace, the respondent with whoever the new respondent is. And that can get sticky if your subject matter jurisdiction. So remember, subject matter jurisdiction in law school. For habeas corpus, what it means is the court does not have jurisdiction over your case unless your client's detained. Detained is hours-long explanation. But basically, if you're in jail or prison, you're detained. If you have a suspended sentence or you're on probation, you're detained. But who do you name? You name the sheriff, the warden of the facility, or the head of the Department of Corrections. If you're moved out of state, it gets a little confusing. Go ahead, Kate.
I'm sorry, John. I disagree. I mean, I think that the custodian always.
What part do you disagree about?
I disagree
Because
that it
I've
would
said
ever
that.
be the federal custodian.
What's that?
I don't think it can ever be the federal custodian. I mean, respectfully, because it's a state habeas corpus action, and the Attorney General doesn't represent the federal custodian. And so I think that you have to look at who is the state custodian. So,
Well, okay, let me clarify. In several instances, your client may be detained in the same jail where he got his conviction. And so there's this confusion about, are you naming the person who is holding him now in ICE custody, or are you naming the person who that's the jail he would have stayed at? Now, I've never named the federal, I've never named ICE or a federal detention center. And that's not what I meant. So if that's what I conveyed, that's not what I meant. Who I name instead is somebody who could have had jurisdiction over him, the head of the Department of Corrections. But if it's a local jail where he would have been in prison anyway, and it's the same person as ICE, that's who I named. But really, I've never had a case dismissed based on who I named. But it does become difficult when you're finding, where is it, Louisiana, where they do these?
Rappahannock is also a rare name, but it's used for immigration purposes as well. Rappahannock, Hampton, and Marlboro, those are the main things you put, I suppose.
I guess my point is that if you can't name the Rappahannock or the Hampton, I think I heard Hampton or Farmville custodians, you want to look at DOC. If the guy was convicted of a misdemeanor, it's going to be the local jail, in which case you won't have to deal with me, you'll deal with risk management, so which some people might think is a good thing. And then, perhaps a probation officer if he was picked up while he was on probation. We haven't really ever dealt with the issue of what to do with a defendant who is on probation, who's not serving a suspended sentence, and I'd be curious to see what the courts would do in that position. I will say that recently in the Supreme Court of Virginia, Justice Lemons took me to task for not challenging the naming of the Commonwealth of Virginia, for not challenging the naming of the Commonwealth of Virginia as the respondent. And he at least cares about whether the proper respondent is being named, whether the proper state custodian is. So I know that I personally am now trying to make an effort of at least trying to get the right proper respondent names, because if I go back to the Supreme Court, anytime you can avoid being yelled at by a Supreme Court justice, that is something that's worth doing. So, yeah.
Well, Ibrahim was a probation case.
Right, and I would say that Ibrahim was not represented by the Attorney General's office, didn't represent the respondent. I don't know why the Fairfax Commonwealth Attorney's Office represented the respondent in that case, and I think that had the AG's office, if it had been my case, I certainly would have appealed that to the Supreme Court.
That wasn't the Commonwealth Attorney who represented him. It was a firm. It was a private firm outside of Roanoke, in Roanoke who did that case.
Oh, well then that was a case where risk management had it.
And the problem with Ibrahim and a lot of other habeas law is your decisions by circuit courts.
Right.
And there's no review, there's very few decisions by the Supreme Court of Virginia. And the circuit courts, the only thing that I can discern in the series of circuit court opinions between like 2001 and 2007 that have granted relief is they were sort of looking at what do I want to do? And then they're finding a way through the myriad of reviews to get where they want to go. But it's very hard to put together any sort of legal principles from the circuit court cases.
And I think that goes both ways too. With certain it depends a lot on which jurisdiction you're in. Certain judges, if they just don't like these habeas corpuses, it works both ways.
Exactly.
They can issue rulings that are basically you can't do anything about.
Yes.
I'm sorry, this is my PSA. If you decide that you would like to do a habeas corpus petition, and more power to you, my one bit of advice that's mostly about getting this teed up properly in the court is your client actually has to sign the petition, and I think that's the most often made mistake. He has to sign the petition under penalty of perjury, or he has to sign an affidavit that avers that he's read the petition and it subscribes to the facts contained therein. It's just one more step that has to be met before the court can consider the merits. So you can save like a month of time by just doing it right the first time.
Anybody else? So some good questions. Going once, going twice. Okay, well, I suppose that concludes our presentation for the day. I hope you guys found that useful and informative. I urge you to please take the time to fill out the short feedback questionnaire you picked up when you checked in. Your comments and your feedback on that form are crucial to our ability to continue to provide practitioners with CLEs that are as useful as possible. I'm happy to collect your feedback questionnaires up here at the front of the room. You can just drop them off on this black table up here in the front. Also, please don't forget to complete and submit either via email either online or via mail your CLE attendance certification forms. Is there anyone who hasn't gotten a copy of that form? Okay. There are copies on the end of the first row over here if you haven't got one. Also, is there anyone who intends to mail that application in, as opposed to use the online verification? Okay, great. So then you don't need to worry about the Virginia State Bar's change of address as of 10 days ago. Last but not least, I'd like to thank our panelists, Mr. Bielowski, Mr. Sheldon, Ms. Ahmed, for graciously volunteering their time to prepare for and present at today's CLE. Let's give them another round of applause. I'd also like to thank George Mason University and, of course, everyone at the Virginia State Bar who helped make this CLE a possibility. Finally, thank you for your interest in the Immigrant Outreach Committee and for attending today's CLE, and we hope to see you again in the near future. Thank you very much.